Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us here at INC Live and for our UFC 272 preview show. My name is Karl Bainbridge and I am joined as ever by the man on the right hand side of my screen. He is the hail to my pace, the ant to my deck. Let's see if you get any of those, John. It's John Martian MMA. John, thank you for joining us.
What's up, everybody? What's up, Karl? INC Lab listeners, thanks for having me as always. We got another pay-per-view. I think it's our, third or fourth one of the year. So we're knocking these pay-per-view events out, and another good card, honestly. The rare non-title fight main event in a pay-per-view, but I think this is still going to be a fun card. A lot of fun matchups on the main card, and looking forward to breaking down these fights with you, Karl.
And I want to say a big thank you as well to everyone who has been supporting the channel over the past 3 or 4 months. We are seeing some fantastic numbers for some of our content. The 271 preview show, over 1,000 people tuning in for that one. Also the 700 people who tuned in to watch my interview with Katie Sauls. Katie was an absolute pleasure to speak to. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out the best for her in SPG with the Johnny Walker result, but lovely person to speak to, and hopefully over the next couple of months we will be having more fighter interviews. It's something that I personally love enjoying, and based on the numbers we're getting, it seems our viewership feels the same way. All that sort of hot dogging and grandstanding out the way, however, people are here to listen to us talk about UFC 272, and as John mentioned, as I get him back onto my screen here, the Skype is really playing up this afternoon. I have to say, UFC 272, we've had two sort of middle of the road pay-per-views, not really sort of big long-term ramifications. This might not be one of those pay-per-views which people are sort of like have sort of like big implications in terms of title pictures, but it's safe to say it's one of the more eagerly anticipated over the past 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to it, but it does seem like these pay-per-views are coming like awfully close to one another. I mean, it seems like just what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were doing the 271 show. I think it's the third pay-per-view in like 6 or 7 weeks or something like that. It seems like they're maybe putting these events a little too close together. It doesn't really give you that time to like build anticipation before the next big pay-per-view, but regardless, it's still a good card. You know, like I said earlier, the way they structured this one, I think they put some fun fights on the card, except for Greg Hardy. I'm not really sure why that fight's on the main card. They got our girl Marina Rodriguez down on the prelims, even though her fight should be, the pretty clear #1 contender fight, after Esparza and Rose fight. So still, really fun card, some good prelim fights as well.
And we will be talking about that card in just a few moments' time. Before we get there, though, let's talk about some of the sort of big stories which have been happening in the world of mixed martial arts. Now, we've almost got through that sort of like winter lull that the UFC normally does around sort of January, February time, when the UFC have a tendency to overstack on the fourth quarter of the year, and that means that the first quarter of the following year does seem to be a little bit weaker than normal. We're starting to plow through that, and now our spring schedule is starting to take shape, including UFC 274, which could be taking place in May. The title fights for that card have both been announced. Charles Oliveira defending against Justin Gaethje, and Glover Teixeira taking on Yuri Prochazka. Obviously, we'll discuss that in a lot more detail when we get to those fights, but it's safe to say May could be a very big month, especially if you're a Brazilian.
Yeah, that's going to be really fun. I think they were originally planning to do the card in Brazil, but I feel like those plans kind of fizzled out. I think it might be happening in Jacksonville. I don't know. Is there an official location announced for that pay-per-view yet?
I think it might be Jacksonville for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be more fun in Brazil. Obviously, Oliveira and Glover both probably deserve that hometown fight. And, those are incredible matchups, fights we haven't seen before. That is obviously always a little more intriguing than rematches like we've been getting for the past few years. But Old Man Glover, one of the greatest stories in MMA in the past several years, getting that title, fighting the madman Jerry Prochazka, just an absolute menacing fighter, coming off of one of the best knockouts of 2021. So that's an amazing matchup. And then the lightweight fight, Oliveira really cemented himself as the true champion at 155. Chandler and Gaethje had that great fight that Gaethje, won pretty handedly. And then he completely deserves that title shot too. So, two amazing title fights. I can't wait to talk about them in depth in the next couple months.
And following that, in June, all roads seem to be pointing towards Israel Adesanya versus Jared Cannonier. Two people who were both on the card at our previous UFC pay-per-view, 271. Based on what you saw on that night, how could you possibly see that one going?
I think it probably will go a little bit similar to the Adesanya versus Whittaker fight we saw. Um, I had some pretty good predictions on that one. Did pick Cannonier to pull off the upset. Did beat Karl on that head to head, just for all you wondering. And then I did say that the main event was going to go the distance. I was pretty confident in that, and it was going to be a closer, competitive 48-47 decision. And I think that was a pretty accurate assessment. In terms of what Cannonier really has to offer, I don't really see much. He is a very good striker, but he's just facing a guy who's a next level striker, incredible speed, and Israel also is getting better at like winning 5 round fights by small margins. We saw it in this last fight, we saw it in the Romero fight, and he's kind of becoming a master at these 5 round lackluster decisions at times, and that could just be another one. So I see like another striking fight where Israel wins pretty clearly, 4 rounds to 1 or something.
Someone made a really good point regarding Adesanya, which is people always have a go. Like, I always use Tim Sylvia as the big example of this. They always believe that there's 2 different types of fighter depending on whether or not they have the belt and whether or not they don't. And people always use Tim Sylvia as a case study because Tim Sylvia was like this big knockout artist just plowing through the heavyweight division. But once he got the belt, he became so paranoid about losing it. He started fighting very, very cautiously. And somebody made the argument, we're starting to see that a little bit with Adesanya. There's a big difference between the way he fought on the way up through the rankings and since he started his title reign.
Yeah, but I think that mostly has to do with like strength of competition. He was able to get a little more, wild and aggressive in his early on fights when he wasn't fighting the highest level guys. But now that he's consistently fighting the top 2, 3 guys in the division, and they deserve respect and caution. And Izzy is approaching these fights in a very risk adverse fashion, which is I think kind of becoming a little unentertaining. I didn't find the Whittaker fight to be an exciting fight at all. So it's interesting. I think the UFC just signed Izzy to like a big new deal, and his fights are kind of fizzling out in terms of entertainment value. So who knows? Interested to see where Izzy goes in the future. And after he beats Cannonier, what is there even left for him at middleweight? He's beaten everyone in the top 5. So maybe they'll have to bring Gegard Mousasi over from Bellator to make another challenger for Izzy.
I'm hearing so many calls for that based on what happened against him and Austin Vanderford. A lot of people, obviously recency bias is a big thing in this sport, but a lot of people are jumping on the Gegard train now.
Yeah, well, between you and me, Izzy would probably butcher Mousasi, but it would still be fun to get him back in the UFC. I don't see it happening though. It's just kind of a pipe dream. I don't know what Izzy's gonna do after this. If he beats Cannonier, like I said, who left is there for him?
Yep.
Maybe Sean Strickland.
It probably will be Strickland, depending on who they matchmake him against. We could be spending all this time talking about Israel Adesanya. You're here, though, to listen to us talk about UFC 272. And as John mentioned earlier on in the show, bit of a unique situation when it comes to the UFC, with this being a non-title fight, a non-title main event, 5 rounds. You seldom see that this day and age unless you're Conor or the Diaz brothers. But I have to say, though, when you bear in mind what could potentially be a non-title pay-per-view main event, Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal, it ticks a lot of the right boxes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is one of the fights that is deserving of that exception for a non-title fight pay-per-view. Very deserving of this. It's got a good backstory. It should be a good matchup. And then I think the coolest thing about this entire pay-per-view is the co-main event, Rafael dos Anjos versus Fiziev in 5 rounds. Like you said, unless you're a Diaz brother, they've never done this 5-round non-title fight on a pay-per-view. I think Nick and Nate are the only 2, right? What wasn't Lawler? Yeah, Lawler and Diaz was scheduled for 5 rounds too, and then Diaz and Leon was 5 rounds as well. So this is only the third time they're doing it. This was supposed to be a main event last week with the Hill Walker card, but they had to push it back a little bit. But that's going to be an incredible matchup. I can't wait to talk about that one. So, like I said, even though there's no title fight, there's no belts on the line. This is still, a very deserving pay-per-view card.
And we will be talking about the 5 fights on our main card in just a few moments' time. Before we get there, though, let's talk about some of the fights which are on the prelims. And I think John sort of mentioned it earlier on in the show. One of the sort of big issues that stems around UFC 272, and it seems to be a lot more commonplace with the UFC. It's one of the sort of big failings I feel is what fights they choose to put on the main card and sort of like card order and that sort of thing. And we're seeing this again when you look at some of the fights on the prelims, especially that second fight, the sort of core main to the prelims. Women's strawweight bout, Marina Rodriguez, my nomination for Female Fighter of 2021. She's in what is basically a number 1 contender match up against Yan Xiaonan. And there's a lot of people thinking this is a big, high-profile match. Winner could potentially face the winner of Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza. Are the UFC missing a trick here, not giving it that pay-per-view showcase?
It's interesting because I think this would have been a little bit better deserved if it was like a co-main event on a fight night. If you look at the co-mains on the first 4 fight nights of the UFC this year, they're just literally atrocious fight after atrocious fight. I don't know what they're doing. But then you have this fight that actually does have some meaning behind it. Rodriguez is probably the number 2 contender at women's strawweight. Shannon is probably in the top 5, even though she did just get dominated by Carla Esparza. But this fight does have some implications behind it. And if Marina wins, she should be definitely next in line after Carla and Rose. But they haven't even scheduled that fight yet, though. So they're kind of dragging their feet with this women's strawweight division a little bit. Weili Zhang is in the mix there somewhere. So, I think this fight is going to be a fun one. I think it's definitely a very deserving high-level women's fight. Honestly, like it could be a main event. Didn't they just schedule like a Holly Holm main event or something like that? Am I making that up, Karl, or is that true?
I think Ketlin Vieira hurt Holly versus Ketlin, which just doesn't make any sense for me. I understand, yes, that Holly still got a big brand name, but her relevance was at its peak 5 years ago, and the fact she still keeps getting these main events, I'm a bit tired of the whole Holly Holm thing, and I'm just thinking, let's get ourselves some new blood. Let's maybe take a chance with a Rodriguez versus a Yan, because I've looked at some of the fight night main events they've been putting on recently, and Marina versus Yan is far more deserving than going Curtis Blades versus Chris Daukaus, another Curtis Blades 5-round main event.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely. Rodriguez has had back-to-back main events, but I thought that, she's a deserving 5-round fighter. I enjoy watching her fight. I think she is one of the more skilled females in the entire UFC. So I'm happy to see her in main events if, we have to have women's main events. But like I said, this one's on the prelims, whatever. Like it's going to be a good fight. Let's not, dwell on it too much. But I think Rodriguez should win that one. Although the odds in this one are pretty crazy. Yan Shannon's over like a 2-1 underdog. So there might be some value on the Chinese fighter here.
Yep. Anything else that stands out for you on the prelims?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing Umar Nurmagomedov again. This guy is honestly like a generational talent, I believe. Incredible kicking game, incredible grappler. Just looks extremely promising. He has only one fight in the UFC so far, but he dominated and finished Sergey Morozov, and Morozov's a really solid fighter. So I'm really excited to see where Umar goes. Kelleher should be a decent test for him as well. But I'm excited to see Umar fight. Any other fights that interest you?
I don't imagine it being the most technical fight in the world, but I always get a kick out of seeing, I hope I pronounce his surname right, Kennedy Nzechukwu. I hope I got that right.
Nzechukwu, yeah.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah, I was never very good at English, I'm afraid to say.
Nergamanu versus Nzechukwu, that's a mouthful, but that should be a really fun fight as well. Yeah, I mean the whole prelims are good. I mean, there's really not a bad fight on the entire prelims. I think they're all pretty relevant, interesting fights. The Ukraine Power, Marian Moroz is going to be facing Maria Agapova. I feel like the Ukrainian fighting spirit is just flowing through their veins right now. So give me Marian Moroz as an underdog all day in that fight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be her first fight for something like 2 years.
Yeah, since like the pandemic card when the Oliveira versus Lee card, right when COVID started.
Yeah. And I hope as well that we manage to get ourselves a short notice replacement for Manon Fiorot. Obviously, she was supposed to fight Jessica Rai. Jess had to pull out of that fight for an injury. And there's a lot of people who are potentially touting Fiorot as a potential Shevchenko opponent down the road. So I'm hoping for her sake she is able to get herself another ranked opponent, because there are a lot of people who are quite high on her.
Yeah, I was looking forward to that one as well. I would definitely be betting and losing money on Jessica I in that fight, so I'm upset that it's being canceled. But Jessica I is a queen. I'm not going to second guess her. I've been a loyal subscriber of her OnlyFans for a long time now, so I hope she'll be back in the mix real soon.
Is she part of your stable?
No, but I did bet on her versus Jennifer Maya, and she deserved to win that fight too. So I have a lot of sympathy for Evil Eye.
Yep. So we're going to be going on to the main card though, and opening the main card, it is a heavyweight bout, a fight that was originally scheduled for UFC 270. Unfortunately though, that fight did fall through. It is Greg Hardy taking on Sergey Spivak. At the moment, the betting odds for this one over at DraftKings, you can get Spivak at minus 220. He's the favourite going into this one. Greg Hardy coming in at plus 180. Now, originally, Greg Hardy was supposed to be fighting Alexei Oleinik at that January card. Oleinik pulled out. Spivak stepped in as a short notice before Hardy himself, I believe it was a broken finger, had to pull out of the fight. It's been rescheduled. And I think the big question coming around this fight isn't so much the sort of implications of this fight. It's more something that we sort of touched on before. Why is Greg Hardy still getting these big main card slots? And I bring this up for three reasons. We've already seen enough of Greg Hardy during his time in the UFC, and I understand that he's still comparatively inexperienced in terms of mixed martial arts, but I think we've seen enough of him to know he's not going to be that sort of big elite level fighter. So putting him on the
I think you're being too nice. You should say we've seen enough of him to know that he sucks at fighting, and what are we still doing with this whole Greg Hardy experiment? Great question.
I just don't want to be part of one of those when karma goes wrong MMA videos they always seem to do. But my point
Well,
is,
no one's making them to defend freaking the woman beater Greg Hardy, so I think we're in the clear.
though, it's not like a Sean O'Malley situation. Like, Sean O'Malley is given pay-per-view main card slots because you expect like a highlight reel and to say, this is MMA's next big superstar. And number two, if you're going down the opposite route and putting him on the main card hoping people pay to see him lose, then why are you putting him against Sergey Spivak, who's primarily a grappler? And if he is going to be Greg Hardy, it's going to be sort of like a submission or sort of like a slow decision. It's not like Tai Tuivasa, which like knocks him out one shot punch.
Yeah, all valid questions. I mean, Greg Hardy is no good at fighting. I mean, he has made some marginal improvements over the time, but just this is still very unnatural to him. I mean, you saw that in the Tuivasa fight. He hurts him with a punch and then runs face first into a counter. And I think he only had a cut on his hand. There was like a slice on his finger. I'm telling you, I know what it came from. When you have an avocado, you cut the avocado and like you put the knife in there, and sometimes it punches through the avocado skin and you cut your whole finger. I guarantee you that's what happened. But yeah, I mean, Sergey Spivak, I think he has Ukrainian roots as well. I think he was born in Moldova, raised in Ukraine. So, the Ukrainian spirit's going to be flowing through his veins. There's no way that he's going to be losing to a chump like Greg Hardy. And, it's a knockout or bust type of fight for Hardy. Hardy's going to need to catch him clean early on, unless Sergey's going to take him down and do, bad things to him. Watch Sergey Spivak versus Jared Vandera, or the last round of the Carlos Felipe fight. I mean, when he gets on top, I mean, he throws hammers, good ground and pound. He was able to choke out Tai Tuivasa just a few years back. So Spivak's a pretty he's not a good striker, but he's serviceable enough to think that I think he's not going to get caught and knocked out on the feet, and I think he's just going to take Hardy down and finish him on the ground in the first 2 rounds. It's probably going to look like the Martian to Burra fight against Greg Hardy.
I'm glad you brought that up in regards to the Taito Avasa fight, because what do you think Sergei Spivak is thinking right now when he sees Taito Avasa in pay-per-view core main events, beating Derek Lewis, going up to number 3 in the world, and he'll be sitting there thinking, well, 3 years ago, I embarrassed this guy. Why aren't I getting the praise and the recognition? It's you sometimes get this where a fighter suffers this sort of early career loss that just fans seem to sort of brush under the carpet a bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely got to feel a little bit sour about all of it. It's interesting though, like if that he was a big underdog in the fight the first time was booked, and I wonder if they booked it again in this year, like what would the odds look like? I think even though Ty got smashed in that fight, I think he would still somehow be like a big favorite in the fight just because of all the momentum he's gained over the past 4 wins or so. But yeah, he's definitely got to be feeling like a little bit left out of the party, seeing as Ty Tuivasa is going to be fighting Ngannou any day now. So.
Is that in BKFC, boxing, Bellator? Where's that happening? Is it going to be happening in the UFC?
Question. It's a shoey competition, honestly. But no. I hope they skip the Stipe Miocic. I hope they don't do Ty versus Stipe. And if they did Ty versus Ngannou, that would just be so fucking great. I think we might have briefly touched on this the last podcast. Like, what if that actually happens? The fact that that's actually a possibility. But I mean, that would just be incredible. So I want to see that Ty versus Ngannou.
I think it's safe to say you're trying to get this back on topic. We're having a lot of fun here, but getting back on topic, you're not really giving Greg Hardy much of a chance in this fight. I actually think he's got a better chance than most people believe. He's right to be the underdog, but Greg does carry a lot of big power very early on in the fight. Even if he has sort of become a bit more of a point fighter these days, we've seen him before very early in his run that he does carry a lot of big power and he can overwhelm people. And I've seen a lot of times for Spivak, one of his big failings is very early on in the fight, because I went back and watched through a lot of Sergei's fights to sort of like get a bit of a understanding of what I can expect. First thing he does very early on in the fight, he's backing himself up against the fence. He's always moving backwards. And that's what let him down when he fought Walt Harris, because we know Walt, big flurries at the start of fight, completely overwhelmed him. Same thing against Tom Aspinall. And if we sort of see the Greg Hardy that was sort of like bulldozing people when he was on the Contender series, he could cause Spivak a lot of problems early on. And I think with Greg Hardy, I don't like praising Greg Hardy. I want to make it perfectly clear I'm not defending this guy. There are some fundamentals he does do very well. He has a very good jab. He was causing Tabura a lot of problems early on in that first round. So if Sergei isn't on his game, if he isn't able to get the takedowns, Greg could cause him a lot of problems, especially in that first round.
Yeah, I think Spivak will get hit a little bit early on, but once he realizes that the striking's not going his way, he'll look to start wrestling. And I just don't trust Hardy at all to stop the takedowns. His cardio kind of melts after a little bit. Like you said, he was beaten up to Burra in round 1 there, but it only lasted for 4 or 5 minutes, and then he got taken down, and one takedown, and the fight was over. So. Yeah, I'm picking the Moldovan monster to get a ground finish here in probably like round 2, I'll say.
If Greg's gonna win this fight, it's gonna be in the first round. I think if it gets into that second round, there are some issues with his conditioning, and as we saw, it's quite strange. Round 1 of the Tabura fight was Greg Hardy's best performance. Round 2 was his worst, because the moment he got taken down to the ground, he seemed absolutely clueless over what to do. And I think if Spivak is able to survive the early onslaught and get it to the mat, I can see him. The question is whether or not it's going to be a submission finish or whether it's going to be ground and pound. I'm going to lean towards ground and pound, because Spivak does have some pretty decent ground and pound. I mean, he bloodied up Taito Avasa.
Yeah, and Vandera, yeah, butchered him up. So yeah, I'm not confident in either whether it's going to be ground and pound or TK or sub, but it's going to be a finish on the mat, I'd say, in round 2.
And this is also the final fight on Greg Hardy's contract. Is this it for him if he loses?
Let's hope so.
I love how you're just completely no-selling any element of this.
Yeah, well, when you watch Greg Hardy fight and you realize that this guy's on a pay-per-view main card, there are some injustices being done here, you know?
Certainly so. Fight number 2 might be a little bit more to your fancy though. Are these two people more deserving of their main card slot? It's Kevin Holland versus Cowboy Oliveira. The big selling point of this one being that it's Kevin Holland's long-awaited debut at the 170 weight class. Now, Kevin Holland was by a long way one of the breakout fighters of 2020. Sort of like I heard him described as the crowdless hero, because it was 5 fights in 2020, including that highlight reel knockout up against Jorge. I'm trying to think, I think it's one of the very few fighters to win 5 fights in a calendar year. And then, of course, 2021 happens, he gets that jump in quality, and we start to see some of the limitations to Kevin Holland's game. He's still the bookmaker's favourite for this one, minus 250 up against Cowboy Oliveira. You can get him at plus 200. Kevin Holland at 170, is this the right move for him to make?
I think it's probably worth a try, considering that he just seems, too small and physically weak for the guys up at middleweight. That really started becoming evident in his past few fights. He did have a great 2020, winning 5 fights. That is impressive, but I think a lot of those wins, aren't, like, in retrospect, extremely impressive. I mean, the Jacare fight was some crazy freak knockout from bottom. Ontiveros is not a real fighter. Darren Stewart, I thought he lost that fight. Buckley was probably the nicest win of all. And then a quick, 30-second finish over Hernandez. He just high rolled himself very, very relevantly. And then it was great for the betting odds, because we got him as a favorite over Derek Brunson, and Blonde Brunson put a wrestling clinic on that man. And then Marvin Vettori did the same thing after that. So I think that Holland moving down to welterweight is, like I said, worth a try. But I also don't know where the hell is the weight coming from. I mean, he's not a thick guy at middleweight, but he's 6'3", and I mean, I can't be easy to cut an additional 15 pounds. It's not like it's going like from 145 to 155, only 10 pounds. It's 15 pounds. So it's going to be interesting to see how the weight cut goes, how his cardio looks, just how he looks physically. He was pretty durable up at 185, very hard to hurt and knock out. But, who knows what it'll look like down at this weight class with that extra weight cut.
I have to say, the UFC Performance Center, they have been very good in getting fighters down to weights that I think a lot of people didn't expect to. I mean, nobody thought Jose Aldo was going to be a success at bantamweight. People were saying this is going to be another flyweight Dillashaw, and he's been thriving recently. We've got Edson Barboza, who is now a featherweight, absolutely shredded at 155, and yet now he's fighting the featherweight. So I do have some confidence that Kevin Holland wouldn't make this decision if he didn't think it could be done. And I actually think as well, you compare him to, say, a Marvin Vettori or a Derek Brunson, who were just muscle upon muscle. I do think Kevin Holland is one of the smaller middleweights out there, so I'm very similar to you. I think it was worth taking the chance. And if he does make a success out of the weight cut, he does have a lot of tools to... I personally expect him to win this fight, mainly because of some of the concerns I have over Cowboy Oliveira. But very rangy, powerful striker. Long, straight punches. We've seen him hurt plenty of guys. I mean, he had Derek Brunson rocked at times during that fight. But it's the striking footwork. He just finds himself in positions where people are able to close the distance against him, get him up against the fence, and once you're up against the fence, he's got no answer. The question is Cowboy Oliveira going to be able to utilize a grappling heavy game to exploit that? Or are we going to see a fighter who, I hate to say it, I mean, I love Cowboy Oliveira. Very exciting fighter. The match with Yancy Medeiros, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated in MMA history.
Me too, yeah. Good shout.
Is this a guy who's past his prime? Is this a guy who's on the way out?
Oh, he's for sure past his prime. I mean, the physicality is just not there anymore. His cardio not there anymore. Round three versus Nico Price, he was real tired. Round three versus Max Griffin, he gets stuck on bottom. That's the thing with Oliveira is once he gets taken down, the guy is so bad at getting off his back. Like he just seems physically incapable of it at sometimes. He just accepts being on his back, goes to full guard, and just lays there for multiple minutes. I mean. The fight can be on the line. Oh, the Nicholas Dalby fight was another example. The fight can be on the line. It can be. It's his fights are always like 1-1 heading into round two, and then he gets taken down and lays on his back the entire round three. Um, so I mean, I can't pick Oliveira here just based on the fact that his cardio is waning, his physicality is waning, his output isn't reliable. He can win a round or two of the first two rounds, but I mean, extremely unreliable in round three. And I mean, I don't like Kevin Holland as a minus like 200 or more, 250 favorite here. I think that's pretty crazy, but I do sort of just expect him to win the fight on being, less shot, uh, probably having the better cardio, being a little more aggressive, and having better initiative. So I don't have like a concrete read on how the fight will go. I just think that Holland will like hustle his way to a decision win, probably.
I'm leaning that way as well. I don't think that Kevin Holland is going to be able to finish Cowboy Oliveira. If there is one sort of note of caution I do have though, I remember watching Cowboy Oliveira up against Gunny Nelson, UFC 231. And obviously that fight ends pretty badly for Cowboy. It's one of the worst cuts that I remember seeing. But a lot of people forget that first round, he took down Gunny Nelson and he kept him there for a good 5 minutes. And Gunny, who we all know, a fantastic jiu-jitsu practitioner, he couldn't do anything with Cowboy's top game. So if Cowboy is able to get this fight to the mat, especially in the first round, we could see the same problems which Kevin Holland's been having so many problems with over these past 2 or 3 fights.
Yeah, I mean that's his way to win. I mean I don't trust his volume on the feet to win, so he's going to have to get some top position. But then comes the problem of is he going to be able to wrestle for three times and over 3 rounds and get takedowns without gassing himself out? But all he needs, in my opinion, is like if Holland throws like a sloppy kick in round one and Oliveira catches it and ends up on top, he's on top and Holland might not get up, and he barely had to use any energy. And then in rounds two and three, he possibly could win one more of those rounds and steal a decision here. So, I mean, I definitely wouldn't be betting on Kevin Holland. You got the weight cut, you got the fact that he's terrible wrestler, terrible on bottom. Cowboy Oliveira at one point was, a freak athlete, and he still does show shades of that during a fight. It's just an inconsistent 15 minutes. So, I mean, I think it's a fantastic matchup. Both these guys definitely deserve to fight one another. They're both, crazy madmen in the octagon. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Fight number 3 is going to be a very interesting one as well, because people like to throw around the old sort of trope of striker versus grappler. But this is as quintessentially striker versus grappler as you can possibly get. It's Edson Barboza taking on Bryce Mitchell, a man who's been in the news for a lot of reasons over these past couple of days. And he's the bookmaker's favourite for this one, minus 155. You can get Edson Barboza at plus 135. Barboza is looking to bounce back from the Giga Chikadze loss. And for Bryce Mitchell, it's the first real test of how good this guy actually is, because at both lightweight and featherweight, Barboza has had this reputation of being a sort of division gatekeeper. You get through Edson Barboza, you have the right to be taken seriously. It's Bryce Mitchell's opportunity to do so. Is it one he's going to take?
Yeah, I would say that Bryce has already impressed me. His win over Andre Fili, I did find, pretty impressive. I rate Andre Fili pretty highly, and he was able to win 2 rounds of that fight on his way to a decision. And the guy doesn't really have much striking at all. I mean, he isn't a functional striker, but what he does is he stays on the outside. He stays outside of kicking range. He enters in close range. He swings a big punch, and then he goes for his takedown right off of that punch. So it's a pretty similar formula that he follows, time and time again, but it works. And he's a really good wrestler. And he is a fantastic jiu-jitsu grappler. I mean, the way he transitions from side control to mount to the back take, he can attack submissions from all angles. I mean, the guy's incredible. Edson Barboza is going to have a tough matchup because, throughout Edson's career, he has not dealt well with wrestlers. I believe Beneil Dariush was taking him down before he got flying kneed. Of course, Khabib took him down and smashed him. Kevin Lee took him down and smashed him. Dan Ige had some success recently on top. Makwan Amirkhani was able to take him down a few times. So it's just the same thing I was saying earlier about Oliveira and Holland, once they get taken down, these guys just don't have that gene in their body to get back up off their feet. I mean, or off their back. They just don't scramble well. They would rather lay on their back for multiple minutes and stay in guard. And that's just a terrible strategy. That's not going to work against Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell's going to be passing and keeping them down. So it's really a matter of, do you think that Edson Barboza can stop the takedowns, or do you think Edson Barboza can knock this guy out before he even gets to the takedown? And I'm leaning Thug Nasty to just get the job done via wrestling and his jiu-jitsu. I think his takedowns are just going to be too good to stop. And once he gets on top, I don't see Barboza getting up.
I'm in a very similar boat. I think that there's a lot of things to like about Bryce Mitchell. Like, obviously, you mentioned it before, his jiu-jitsu is absolutely incredible. I love the way, especially, that he just seems to flow between submissions at times. He'll go from head and arm chokes, he'll try and throw in a twister in there. I love seeing submission experts who are just so fluid in the way they do. It's not just 5 minutes of like lay and pray and then maybe go for a submission right at the end of the round. He is always trying to chase those finishes. And you can see that in his result. I think it's something like, 14 wins, and I think it's 11 or 12 of them have come by submission. So this guy has great prowess. I am interested to see, though, one of the things I haven't really seen from Bryce Mitchell over his UFC career. Nobody's ever really tested his chin. And I do wonder if Edson Barboza is able to either throw in like a good head kick in there, or his left hook, because I think Barboza's striking, his actual hand speed, has got a lot better. We saw that when he fought Shane Burgos, which turned basically into a boxing match. That I do think his hands have got a lot better. I am interested to see if Bryce Mitchell is able to handle that side of things. But as you mentioned before, we've seen so many times Edson Barboza fall victim to the same thing. He gets backed up, but he cannot fight going backwards. We've seen that plenty of times before. And if someone is able to take him down, he just seems very content to just sit back, wait until the round's over, and just think, okay, I lost that one, let's go again, let's see what happens. There's no fight coming back from him if he gets taken down.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with all that. And last thing I'll say about Mitchell is what really impressed me in the Andre Fili fight is the guy's cardio. He can wrestle for the full 15 minutes. He got a takedown early in round one. He kept him down the entire round, won it decisively. Round two, Fili started hitting him with some strikes, started stuffing takedowns. He stood up from one takedown. It was Andre Fili's round. He landed the better shots, even though the dumb judges thought 2 out of 3 judges thought that Mitchell won that round somehow. But it was 1-1 heading into the third. The momentum was kind of on Fili's side, and then Mitchell was still able to dig deep, shoot those takedowns, get those takedowns, and win the round 3 decisively. So, I mean, the guy's cardio is good. He can wrestle hard for 15 minutes, and I think that that's going to be good enough to beat Barboza. Barboza is going to need a knockout. I think that he's going to have to catch Mitchell coming in with, a flying knee like he did Dariush, or, get him at range with a big body kick, but I don't see Barboza winning the fight via decision or submission at all. It's going to have to be a knockout if he wants to win.
A lot of the detractors of Bryce Mitchell, and there's certainly been a lot more of them coming out the woodwork over the past couple of days, they'll point towards what happened on The Ultimate Fighter when he fought Brad Katona. Now, even though that wasn't an official sanctioned fight, it is still a loss that Bryce Mitchell has had in his MMA career. What can Edson Barboza learn from the Katona fight that could potentially give him an avenue to get the win?
So was that fight a bantamweight? I mean, I remember that being one of the best tough fights I ever saw, honestly. But and then no, that was featherweight.
I think it was featherweight, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Katona was able to match that grappling pace, and it was a really high paced fight. And I don't have vivid recollections of it, but like I said, I remember it being a really good fight. I think it was also maybe 1-1 heading into round 3, but I think Katona is probably a more versed defensive grappler Barboza is. But I thought you were going a different way with that. I thought you were going to say the detractors of Mitchell are going to point out to him getting his nutsack caught in a drill bit. I thought that's where you're going, but you brought up a fighting point. But yeah, you got to think you are betting on a guy who did get his own nutsack tangled up in a drill bit and had to go to the hospital room about it. So you can't really put your money too heavily on Bryce Mitchell here as a favorite.
I will make one last point though in regards to Edson Barboza. I was looking through the guy's portfolio in the UFC. These are some of the guys he's beaten while he's been part of the promotion. Shane Burgos, Dan Hooker, Beneil Dariush, Gilbert Melendez, Anthony Pettis, Paul Felder, Bobby Green. That's like a who's who of lightweight fighters. So, and you just seem to think sometimes, so as good as Edson Barboza was and still is, he often gets a little bit overlooked when it comes to like great lightweight fighters. I mean, that's a great portfolio of victories.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's only really lost to elite level fighters. I mean, you could argue that if he lost to a Mitchell, it would arguably be one of his worst losses in the UFC. I mean, in retrospect, I think the Kevin Lee and the Giga Chikadze losses could age worse, but it will be definitely the best win of Mitchell's career if he gets that win, and he is the 60% favorite here. So maybe people are getting a little too high on Bryce Mitchell. Maybe Barboza can pull off another bet lesson, but I'm going with Mitchell to grapple his way to a win.
Co-main event time now, and it's the battle of the Rafaels in the lightweight division. It is Rafael dos Anjos, the former lightweight champion. He is taking on Rafael Fiziev. And it's Fiziev, the Kyrgyzstan fighter, who is the bookmaker's favourite for this one, minus 240. You can get RDA at plus 195. Now, this was originally intended to headline the Johnny Walker versus Jamal Hill card, but it was pushed back to 272 due to Fiziev having issues with his visa. It's a 5-round core main, which is one of the few times that the UFC have actually done this. You mentioned before, most of them involving the Diaz brothers. And we'll start this off by asking the big question which everybody's been asking. Who is MMA's greatest Rafael?
Well, what I was thinking is we only have one Rafael. We have one Rafael in this fight because Rafael Fiziev is not Brazilian, so he would pronounce the R. But I like what you're going with just the Rafael versus Rafael. Honestly, like somehow I've been thinking about this fight for the past few days, and I never really put that two and two together. Which is ridiculous, honestly. But I love both these guys. I don't understand how you couldn't love both these guys. They're both, fantastic fighters. RDA is honestly an all-time great, one of probably the most underrated fighters ever. And Fiziev has just been facing a steady step up in competition in the UFC, and he's been passing those tests every time. And the guy's been impressing me time and time again. I was betting on Bobby Green and Brad Riddell and Moicano against him, and the guy just proved me wrong time and time again, just, beating those guys up. I mean, the Riddell knockout, beautiful spinning back kick. So, this is an amazing matchup. I'm very happy they made it 5 rounds, even though it was, a co-main event on a pay-per-view, and it's just going to be an incredible fight. So I'll let you start this one off, Karl, on your thoughts on how the matchup goes.
Well, we'll start off by talking about RDA as well. And we mentioned with Edson Barboza as being one of those sort of overlooked great fighters in the lightweight division. RDA, as you sort of touched on there, deserves to be in the same boat. Look at some of the wins that he's had. Kevin Lee, Robbie Lawler, 2 wins over Donald Cerrone, Anthony Pettis, Nate Diaz, Benson Henderson, another who's who of great lightweight, welterweight fighters. And I do think that people are starting to come around and appreciate how good Rafael dos Anjos actually is. Because a lot of people forget, when he became lightweight champion, he was not a popular champion by any means. They were having to put his fights on Fox and on Fight Pass just to get people to try and care about his sort of road to the title. And I think now we're seeing him once again in sort of fight night main events. He's been given a pay-per-view co-main, which a lot of casual viewers are going to be watching. So I do think that people are starting to turn the corner and realize, hey, this guy was a great fighter. We should appreciate him while he's still around.
Yeah, I do agree. The public sentiment is finally coming around on him, and going back and forth between welterweight and lightweight, and he took at least 3 years off of uh lightweight, and then came right back and put together a nice 5 round performance over Paul Felder. Very well-rounded performance. Used a pretty heavy grappling attack in that fight, and I think that's what he's going to have to do again here because even though RDA is an extremely skilled striker, his speed, his some of his power is probably a little bit past his prime on the feet, and he's going to be at a striking disadvantage versus Fiziev, who is a tremendous striker. Great body kicks, solid boxer as well, and he also can go a pretty hard 3 rounds. He does slow down a little bit towards the end of the fight, but the Brad Riddell fight, he didn't slow down at all because that was, kind of a calm, striking pace the entire fight. And Fiziev proved that he's not going to slow down at that pace at all. It's a really high pace striking fight like the Bobby Green fight where he does slow a little bit. So I think the guy's cardio is a little bit of a question mark, especially considering this is his first 5 round fight. I believe in all of MMA. I don't think he's had any 5 round experience. So it's going to be a big question of what does Fiziev's cardio look like, and then what does his defensive grappling look like? Because you got to think that RDA is going to be looking to grapple here. He grappled real heavy versus Paul Felder. RDA has good takedowns, great top pressure, great submission game as well. So you got to think that RDA is going to be looking to wrestle, and then you have to think about what does Fiziev's takedown defense look like? And I think it has looked pretty good so far, but we also haven't seen it tested against that high level grapplers. He fought, Moicano, but Moicano didn't try to grapple. Mark Diakese does come from a wrestling background. He did fail a few takedowns. Alex White failed a lot of takedowns. So Fiziev's takedowns defense has looked good so far, but I also think that RDA is going to be the best grappler wrestler he's fought by a pretty wide margin. So some of that old footage of him defending takedowns, might not translate to this matchup too well. And that's why it's so interesting to me. That's why I think that RDA is a pretty live underdog here at over a 2-1 underdog because I think he could have a grappling advantage. He certainly has the experience advantage. He's got the 5 round experience
Mm.
advantage as well. So, I mean, I think people are writing off RDA a little bit in this fight.
And also as well, RDA likes to fight at a very high pace during his fight.
Yeah, I mean he brings the pressure. Had no problem going 5 rounds against Paul Felder, and if I had to guess, I would say like the majority of his past 10, 15 fights have been scheduled for 5 rounds. I mean, I wonder what the guy's record is in 5 round fights. He lost to Leon Edwards, he lost to Colby Covington and Camaro. Those are all big elite level welterweights, but in 5 round fights at lightweight, I think. Oh yeah, no, he did lose to Eddie and to Tony. So, but those didn't. Only one of them went the full 5 rounds. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say the guy is great in 5 round fights, very experienced in 5 round fights.
My personal take is I think the one big concern that most people have about RDA is it's the age and it's the inactivity. Because the last time he fought was the Paul Felder fight, which was November 2020. So we're looking at a 14-month break between fights. Now, obviously, ring rust affects different fighters in different ways. It had no issue when it came to Glover Teixeira, who spent like over a year out and still ends up dominating his title fight. Is ring rust going to be a factor when it comes to Dos Anjos at 37 years old? And that's the one sort of question mark I have. I personally think RDA would beat Fiziev if this fight happened 2 or 3 years ago. But I think a 37-year-old RDA, there's too many question marks about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. I mean, if like I said, like you said, if this fight happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the odds could be flipped. RDA could be the 250 favorite. But that's really the question: is has RDA declined with his age enough to the point where he should be a big underdog? And I don't think the guy has slowed down that much to the point where he deserves, be like. I mean, if you did the implied probability of his odds in this fight, they would be like less or around 30%. You really think 30% for RDA? I mean, I think that's a bit disrespectful, especially when you consider the odds against Brad Riddell. Brad Riddell is, that was a striker versus striker, and I did bet Riddell in that fight, so I can't talk that much. But the odds in that fight were much closer, and Riddell had no grappling upside in that fight. So you're getting a guy in RDA who has the grappling upside, who has the 5 round experience upside, and I think I'll be having my money on RDA in this fight. I'm not going to be confidently picking him to get it done, but I think 1 or 2 takedowns from RDA early on in this fight could really zap the energy of Fiziev and just make this fight look like a completely different fight than people expect. So I like RDA's chances. I'll be cheering for him to pull off the upset.
Do you know what this fight reminds me of? It reminds me of Calvin Kattar versus Giga Chikadze. You've got sort of like the big hype train of the moment, like especially with a striking background, going up against a guy who's been out for a long time, who people have sort of maybe forgotten about in terms of their prowess. And as we saw, Calvin gave them a big reminder of how good he is and kind of exposed some of the limitations in Giga. This feels very similar. And if it does turn out the way that you potentially see it going, where RDA turns this into a 5-round grappling fest, there could be a lot of people like saying, hey, I told you so, why didn't we see that again? I think Fiziev deserves to be the favourite. I would have him around sort of like a 140 range. He shouldn't be as high as 240.
Yeah. I mean, he's up to 260 in some places, which puts his chances over 70%. So I think people are disrespecting the old vet RDA. I still think he's got plenty left in the tank. And with the right game plan, the grappling heavy game plan, I think he could, win this fight easily with that approach. So a really awesome fight. I don't dislike Fiziev at all. I wouldn't be mad to see him win because, the guy is tremendous. But I think there's a little bit of enough questions out there to have some skepticism over this big price tag on him as a favorite.
It is now time for us to talk about our main event of the evening, and we go into the welterweight division. And as we mentioned before, it is a rare occasion when it comes to the UFC. Outside of Conor McGregor and the Diaz brothers, the last time that the UFC did a pay-per-view non-title main event, Dan Henderson versus Rashad Evans, UFC 161. It's happening once again. It's Colby Covington taking on Jorge Masvidal. Colby is a big bookmaker's favourite for this one. You can get him at minus 335 with DraftKings. Jorge Masvidal comes in at plus 260. Now, the big question that a lot of people want to bring up first and foremost, John, is a lot has been made of the fact that this is a pay-per-view main event. Does it deserve to be one?
Yes, for sure. I think that both these guys are well known enough. Jorge definitely has a lot of popularity behind him. And there's a legitimate good storyline behind this fight. I mean, I think a lot of times the storylines in title fights or main events are extremely forced. Like the Cyril versus Ngannou, I didn't find that extremely compelling. I get with the whole coach thing and whatnot, but these guys legitimately were good friends. Now they don't like each other. If you haven't seen it, look up the video of Jorge and Colby wrestling on Thanksgiving or something like that. These guys are lived in an apartment together and they wrestle around their apartment for 20 minutes straight. There's shit all over the apartment, just all this stuff. It looks like they just moved in, and these crazy motherfuckers are wrestling one another around in the apartment like it's a full MMA practice. I mean, it's a great video. And I think Jorge was in Colby's corner for the RDA fight when he won his interim championship. These guys were legitimately best friends at one point. And they went their separate ways back in 2019. They had personal disputes, some disputes over their coach. They used to train at the same gym. They split gyms. So, I mean, this is a really good storyline. I think that it could, if you watch a promo that the UFC puts together about these guys, I feel like it could be actually a compelling story that makes people want to tune in.
I'm in a very similar sort of boat to you. I think it does deserve to be a pay-per-view main event. I was looking through some of the sort of recent title fights that the UFC have done and some of the title fights that they got planned now. And I think Colby versus Masvidal could do far better numbers than it's going to do better numbers than Volkanovski versus Zombie. Probably do better numbers than Gaethje versus Charles Oliveira. The one thing that the naysayers will say though is both of these guys are coming off losses to the same guy. And if you actually go back through the figures, they have only had 2 wins between them in the past 2.5 years.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely both Kamaru Usman's sons, no doubt about that. Kamaru, beat both their asses both times, um, but yeah, I'm sure they're both extremely grateful to be fighting a guy besides uh, Kamaru Usman for a change. But I think you can really be skeptical about Colby Covington's run that he's been on. I mean, if you look at like some of his past wins, Tyron Woodley, not impressive at all. Robbie Lawler far past his prime, and he did beat Lawler bell to bell, but so did RDA. So did uh, Neil Magny. A lot of guys have been beating up on Lawler lately, this late in his career. And then Colby, his best win is a very marginal decision over RDA. A lot of people, my good friend Sriram still stands to this day that RDA won that fight. And it sounds crazy to some people, but it sounded crazy to me at first time. But you go back and watch it, and Colby, he gets a takedown. He doesn't do anything with it. Colby or RDA stands up. RDA knees him in the stomach. He separates. Colby gets a takedown. He doesn't do anything with it. I mean, Colby wrestles and has a crazy pace and has great wrestling, but once he gets the fight to the floor, he doesn't do a whole lot of damage. He doesn't land a lot of ground and pound. He doesn't attack submissions, and the guy's kind of a crotch sniffer at times. He wrestles hard for the entire time. He's got incredible cardio, incredible output, but I just don't think the guy does damage that much. He doesn't look to hurt his opponents. While Jorge is a very damaging fighter. I mean, he knocks dudes stiff. Asked Darren Till, Ben Askren about that. He beat the shit out of Nate Diaz. Made that look fairly easy in that fight. And I think Masvidal just a much harder hitter, the much more damaging fighter. And I mean, the odds for this fight are crazy, in my opinion. I mean, we got Colby Covington as a minus 350 favorite, Jorge Masvidal almost a plus 300 underdog. I think the people are disrespecting Jorge Masvidal. I mean, I kind of been thinking about this way about all the underdogs. I think all the underdogs. Actually, no, I'd say Spivak and Mitchell are fine, and then RDA and Masvidal are the value underdogs. So, what are you thinking about how these two match up?
I think a lot of it might be weighted into how both performed against Kamaru Usman, because both times, especially the first time when it came to Colby, Colby gave Kamaru Usman a lot of trouble, especially in that first fight. And I even saw people in the second fight trying to make some sort of argument that Colby won that. I personally thought it was 4-1 to Usman to win that. And yet with Masvidal, it was 5-round domination, first time round, and then second time around, big highlight reel knockout, which put Masvidal out. I think I read somewhere, 50 fights Jorge Masvidal has had, and that's only the 4th time he's been finished, which I think that tells you everything you need to know in regards to how big of an achievement that was for Kamaru Usman to finish that fight. I think that Masvidal does have some strengths behind him. I think his takedown defense on the whole is very good. And even the second time around, I think Kamaru only landed the one takedown in that second fight, and Masvidal was pretty much straight afterwards. So I think his grappling is a lot better than people give it credit for. But the thing with Colby is it's that pace. It's that pace and that striking style. It's not the flashiest. It's a bit sloppy, but it's constant output. He, quite appropriately, considering Colby, it's an annoying striking style. It's just shot, 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 shot. And nobody can get the chance to build up some momentum. We saw that when Robbie Lawler fought him. And I can see him frustrating Masvidal in the same way. And Masvidal's just not going to be able to get his striking game going because Colby's just constantly on him all the time.
Yeah. So starting at distance, I think that you got to give Masvidal the advantage at distance.
Yes.
I don't think anybody would really dispute that. Colby's going to be pumping out that volume like he does, but that's going to give opportunities to be countered. And there's no doubt about it that Jorge is the harder puncher. He's a very skilled kicker as well, very underrated kicking game. So at distance, striking range, Masvidal is going to be landing the better shots, and he's going to be winning the fight at that range. So then you have to be very, very confident that Colby is going to get it into the clinch, get it into the wrestling over and over again, and then you have to be confident that he's going to keep it there for 3, 4 minutes around. Because I could see scenarios where Colby gets a takedown, controls him for 2 minutes, but then they get back to distance, and Masvidal lands a few punches, and then that kind of could swing the round right back. I mean, like I was mentioning, Colby doesn't do a whole lot of damage, doesn't land a lot of ground and pound. So when he gets these takedowns, he doesn't do a whole lot with them. So I could see him getting takedowns for the first few minutes of a round. Then Jorge works his way back up to the feet, gets back to range, lands a knee or an elbow on the breaks, lands a few punches, lands a kick at the end of the round, and then the round becomes really, really close all of a sudden because Masvidal is doing the most damage. You guys got to remember that the scoring criteria says damage is the number one
Mm.
factor. It's above effective grappling. It's above controlling a person against a cage. It's all about damage. So if Jorge can just find some small opportunities to land damage, I think he could really swing these rounds back in his favor. And I think this one is extremely likely to go the distance. It is favored at -142 to go the distance. I mean, I think if anyone is finishing the fight, it's going to be Masvidal via
Mm.
knockout. But I mean, Colby is pretty tough too. I mean, it took a sustained beating for Usman to finish him. He got dropped by Usman and fought his way back. So I think this one is going to be hitting the scorecards for sure. And I think it's going to be a 48-47 on either side. I could see it being really similar to the RDA fight where RDA, I mean, I was just describing it again. But RDA lands a strike at distance, gets taken down, gets back up, lands some strikes in the clinch, and then the rounds are really 50-50. And, I just don't think that Covington is as damaging of a fighter as you want him to be betting him at, 75, 78% here. So I like Masvidal as the underdog here, and I think he's got a great chance to win straight up.
One of the things I have noticed about Jorge Masvidal, especially during this whole sort of Street Jesus career reinvention, is Masvidal has always been a fantastic technical striker, probably one of the best jabs in the sport. But one of the things I noticed when he came back into action against Darren Till, and as we've seen for the rest of his fights, he has been a lot more aggressive. He's started to sort of mix that sort of technical prowess and be a lot more come forward. It's mixing the brawler, the street fighter, with the technician. He needs to do the same thing in this fight, because if he allows Colby to start pressing the pace and be the one to dictate where the fight's going, he's not going to win this fight whatsoever. He needs to be the aggressor. He needs to put the pressure on Colby. And whether or not that causes sort of like long-term effects later on in the fight, I think it's a chance he needs to take.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I was just kind of looking at, Masvidal I feel like he's always the underdog. And, looking back, in his past 8 or 9 fights, he was only favorite one time to Nate Diaz. He was a dog to Usman both times, to Askren, he was underdog. Till underdog. Stephen Thompson, Damian Maya underdog to all these guys. I feel like he's always in a tough matchup, but he typically overperforms those expectations of him being the underdog too. So I just think that this could be another example of that, of him being underrated by the market here. And I think that people are a bit crazy for betting Colby Covington as over a 3-1 favorite. I don't see that as a good bet at all. So I'll be cheering for Jorge to get this one done for sure.
Do you think maybe a lot of that is down to the amount of fights that they've had, and especially the number of losses? I think that a lot of the sort of punters are a big reason that dictate all of these sort of betting odds. And we've seen a lot of times that you can have a fighter who has that sort of zero next to the name, and I find that the punters always give them more leeway than what they normally do. Do you think there's maybe just some people? Do you think there's maybe people out there that see that 15 next to Jorge and maybe don't give him the credit because of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are we call them like quantitative bettors, where they look at stats, they look at numbers, they look at records, and then they bet based on that. But there's so much more to fighting besides that. It's a qualitative game. You have to look at how the fights really went. You have to watch the footage. For example, I mean, this will already be the fight have already happened by the time this gets released. But look at Bobby Green tonight as a 6-1 underdog against Islam Makhachev. people are putting so much stock into Green having 10 losses and Islam being 21-1 and Khabib's prodigy and whatnot. But Bobby Green is an extremely defensive grappler. He's a great fighter everywhere, and Bobby Green's pulling off this upset and is going to beat Islam Makhachev. We recorded this before the fight happened, by the way. It's 3 p.m. It's 3 p.m. on a Saturday. So when you guys watch this tomorrow, throughout the week, just be like, damn, that guy was right about Bobby Green pulling off the upset. So. I like I said, once again, I like Masvidal as a bet here, 3-1 underdog. I'm happy to put my money on him at that price.
Yep. Jorge Masvidal is 37 years old now, and he's coming off 2 straight losses, both to the same guy, Kamaru Usman. Now, Jorge Masvidal was the sort of like the big sort of flavor of the month in the MMA world. He was the BMF champion, he was Street Jesus, and he ended up being legitimately one of the sport's biggest stars. Can he still be a big star if he loses to Colby? Or is that the end of the sort of Masvidal hype, as it were?
2 words. Jake Paul. I think win or lose, he's fighting Jake Paul after this. And I don't know what his UFC contract is like or whatnot. But I would, if I were him, I would do everything in my power to box Jake Paul, because that's a big money fight right there. He can make $10 million boxing Jake Paul in this next calendar year if he wants to. So I hope he does that. That would be fun to see.
And final, sort of, to wrap this whole thing up, who's winning this fight and how's it going to happen?
Masvidal 48-47 decision is my pick.
I'm going to go against you. I'm going to go with the same way that most of the bookmakers are saying. I'm going to pick Colby Covington 49-46.
I like it. But again, what I'll say is the same thing I said last prediction is my most official confident prediction is this one goes the distance. And they have goes the distance at like 58% here. So they think this fight ends by finish, 40% of the time. No way. I'll take goes the distance for sure.
And that is all the time that we have for the UFC 272 preview show. I have to say, John, there were some people, some naysayers thinking, oh, it's a non-title fight. It doesn't have that same sort of buzz that it would do for if the belt was on the line. But I have to say, given what we have to work with, obviously the 2 big, larger-than-life personalities of both Colby and Masvidal, whether they are genuine or not, they have added that little extra buzz to this matchup and to this card.
Yeah, like I said, it was a great story. It's a good matchup. People have been wanting to see this fight for years. Great co-main event, 5-round co-main event. Oliveira and Holland should be fun. Mitchell and Barboza should be fun. Hopefully seeing Greg Hardy lose will be fun. So I think they did, a good job with this pay-per-view. The only questionable decision is the Hardy fight. I probably would have liked to see Marina on the main card instead, or maybe even throw Umar on the main card. But as we saw before our last preview show, they sometimes mix up the order in the middle of the week. Remember that we analyzed Rojo and Phillips, and then they switched Hernandez and Moicano there instead. So maybe they make a last-minute change to the card. Hopefully not, though, because that means we didn't analyze one of the fights. But it's been a pleasure discussing the fights, as always, with you, Karl. A lot of fun coming in on the channel every time. Glad to see the INT Live podcast videos getting the views they deserve in the past few weeks. So hopefully that continues. And thanks to everyone who's listening and showing support. You can find me, Martian MMA, on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and my Twitter is at UFO_UFC.
And you will cover all of the fights in a lot more detail when you do your preview show later on in the week. So hopefully, if they do chop and change the card a little bit, we'll have it covered at least in some way.
Yes, sir. I'll do a full event breakdown on all the fights coming out later this week. So check me out on all my socials that I just mentioned. So thanks again for having me, Karl. Great talking as always.
Definitely, John. And thank you very much for tuning in as well. This has been the UFC 272 preview show. My name has been Karl Bainbridge. That has been John Martian MMA.
See you later.
And we'll be seeing you again in 4 weeks' time. It will be UFC 273. Can the Korean Zombie take advantage of his last-minute title fight and pull off the upset over Alex Volkanovski? We'll discuss that fight as well as Piotr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. That's coming up in 4 weeks' time. This has been the INC. Thank you very much for watching.